This is a short video on week 2 of Pathrick Lecture 15, which is the influence between the spiritual and the material worlds. I rearranged the lecture, and I gathered up the bits and pieces on dreams and daydreams and put it into this week's section. And am re-recording this video because the first time around I gave it short shrift, meaning that I forgot how I know what I know or how I understand what I understand. One of the advantages I can bring to explaining the concepts is I remember what I didn't understand, and I can realize how I got helped, and in that way I am more able to help others, understanding why something that once you get it seems so simple, why it's so hard to get there. Dreams and daydreams, I believe, are like that. So as I thought about it, I realized how complicated it had been for me in the beginning. So I'm going to explain it from that perspective. The difference between dreams and daydreams, just to start with, is that the guide explains dreams or uses the phrase dreams in terms of being unconscious, asleep, rather than being conscious and your mind wandering. In the interpretation of dreams within the lectures, he specifically addresses dreams that happen during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the deepest part of sleep. This is the part of sleep that science says if we don't get it, a regular share of it, we'll die. This is what lack of sleep can kill people. Now, scientists try to explain it biologically. The Pathrick explanation for this is that it is during REM sleep that we return to spirit and we do things. We talk, we share, we go, we explore, we have an adventure, and the dreams are what we bring back. Now, one of the standard ways that I explain that is we live inside the limited mind. And when we bring dreams back from other dimensions that are wider, bigger, more expansive than ours, we have to take that construct and get it through the neck of the bottle. We have to get it into our head. And sometimes to do that, we have to basically reduce it to splinters. And then when we reconstruct it, we may basically reconstruct a Frankensteinian creature rather than the original experience, because that experience happened when there were more dimensions. And to reconstruct it in human understanding means we have to reconstruct it in 5 or 6 dimensions rather than 50 dimensions. So that's REM sleep in pathwork is about that period of time where you refresh yourself by going to spirit. And when you bring stuff back, sometimes it's like you bring back souvenirs, postcards, or homework. Now, some people say they don't remember their dreams. That doesn't belie the fact that that's what happened. It just means they didn't have anything left over. It wasn't necessary to carry through some idea. But this is where the interpretation of dreams can be treated very linearly, or it can be treated less linear, more expansively, so that you're looking for the emotional, energetic meaning of the tiger, the door, the second floor, the fourth family, whatever ideas in your dreams. Ava Parakas was trained in dream interpretation, and on my website under this title, I have included her very short description of this. The guide addressed this daydreams and dreams in another lecture, Pathrick Lecture 98, and also in the document Path to the Real Self, Chapter 27, Dreams and Daydreams are addressed. So it's a big thing in Pathrick. Why? I'm going to let go of the idea of dreams for a moment because I've spoken about that at length. I want to talk about daydreams. Now, in daydreams, you have consciousness, and that changes the substance and the form of it. It changes how they come to you, what you do with them, because you have some level of conscious control of it. Now, the example that to differentiate these that I remembered was that during the actual lecture transmissions, when the guide Ava was in trance and the guide spoke through her to a room full of people, it was recorded, then transcribed, and that's what we're reading is the transcriptions. It's very common for people to fall asleep. When I listen to the tape recordings of Ava giving the lecture, I, at some point, always go into a micro sleep. I nod off. I lose my place in this world, fall asleep a little bit, and come back just for a moment. The people in the room sometimes went unconscious so deeply that they would snore. And there were questions and answers in the question and answer sections. You'll hear someone say, but they're snoring. And the guide says, nudge them if you have to. But there's a reason. They are not sleeping. And the guide's explanation at that moment was, sometimes it is important to get consciousness out of the way so that the information can go in, that the consciousness might battle the information or try to understand it. And so when consciousness isn't present, then the subconscious can be more easily impressed. Now, that's scary to some people. I read the Pathwork lectures and do not find any attempt to manipulate or influence me in any untoward fashion. So yes, that could happen. I don't believe it did happen, but that's my opinion. But here's my point, that when we're sleeping, our consciousness is out of the way, even if we aren't in the deepest REM sleep. And that's what differentiates dreams from daydreams. Now, daydreams also work with the subconscious, but it's back and forth. So it's as if you're speaking two different languages, the conscious language and the subconscious language, and you don't necessarily notice when it switches back and forth. Think of this as the current studies in inherent bias, unconscious bias, where our subconscious wants something and it just influences, it just nudges, it just puts a weight on a decision that we don't realize is happening. Now that's murky territory, so I came up with another example. And my example is idioms. Idioms in all languages make no sense to foreigners. I find them delightful. I study them now as part of my fascination with Pathwork Lecture 233, The Power of the Word. So I know that one has been rolling around in my head for a while, and it seems like a good example here. But to get there, I'm going to have to walk you through a few. Now, these are English idioms. That's my language. I have learned idioms from other languages, but rather than play with those, I'll stay with English. There's an idiom in English, easy as pie, which makes no sense at all, because pie is hard to make. A good pie takes a lot of work and effort. So what does easy as pie mean? Well, it could be a substitute for piece of cake. Something is easy, it's a piece of cake. Cake is usually light, it's not tough to eat, it's sweet, it's pleasant, even though, again, it may be very difficult to construct a good cake. So there's a logical and an illogical element in there. I looked it up on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says that the term pie, P-I-E, is a word used for the liturgical rules for the 35 days that it's possible for Easter to fall on. Easter follows the moon calendar. It's complicated. That's why it moves around. Jewish holidays also follow the moon calendar. They move around. So for instance, this year, 2024, Hanukkah starts on the 25th of December. It can start as early as the 6th. of December. Doesn't usually fall into November because it follows a different moon calendar. Life is complicated. Let's get back to the Catholic Christian use of the word pie. That easy as pie could have started as a phrase that was ironic. If there are complicated rules for what day Easter can fall on, this is not something most people would be able to parse. And so easy as pie being ironical for it's really, really hard. It's not easy at all. And yet pie provokes, it calls forward the edible item. And so you get this strange mix of meanings that could have started in many places, but they wind up being an idiom. It's just an idiom. And there's a place where you can understand it emotionally, even though it doesn't make sense mentally, intellectually. Now, the other one that's been rolling around in my brain is Bob's your uncle. It's a United Kingdom British phrase. Bob's your uncle drives me crazy because I understand it, but I don't know why. Bob's your uncle means easy as pie. It means that's all there is to it. In Wikipedia, they said it was equivalent to the French et voilà. There you go. That's it. And that it came from a case of nepotism, perhaps. Idioms are very difficult to trace. It may have come from a case of nepotism in the late 1800s, where somebody was promoted to a government job because their uncle was a higher up. So since Bob was his uncle, it was easy for him to get the job. So how to get the job? Bob's your uncle. Here's my point in bringing these up, besides the fact that I like them. Again, they're understandable on an emotional level, but if you try to understand them intellectually, mentally, if you try to use them as a specific locator of all these incidents, you lose it. It's not a mental, it's not an intellectual connection. That's what daydreams can do. That's what happens when the subconscious is involved. It's not as easy to explain as you think it ought to be. Like dreams, they wander, they go into strange places, and they are exercising aspects of us that we may not be fully conscious of. For decades, I would dream of being the hero. When I was a child, I would dream of cowboys and Indians because it's when I was raised. That's what kids did. And I would save the town, or as an Indian, I would save the tribe, or it was always a game of being the hero, where I wanted to be the person who stood up and accomplished something. Now, that would come from my feeling that I didn't save or do anything. I had no power. I was a kid with glasses. I wasn't popular. I had no authority, no power. So I daydreamed glory, winning, applause, acclaim, popularity. There's nothing wrong with this. The problem is what happens with everything that becomes an addiction or destructive behavior is that you stay there instead of coming back to the real world. You get all your needs met in the daydreams, and you don't turn the daydreams into an impetus to put change into your life. In effect, you get pleasure from the daydreams that satisfies you so that you go back to your life and you don't do anything. That's the danger of daydreams. And I believe that that's what the guide is talking about in this section, that that's the problem with daydreams. Not that they exist at all, everyone does it, but that they relieve the pressure to do something, that we don't look at them carefully enough. Even as a kid, I was aware that I was doing hero stuff in my dreams. I knew that. As a young adult, I would do it, and I knew it, but I didn't know what else to do. I don't believe that particular vice of mine became destructive, but I do understand where it was an escape from a reality that I wasn't managing well. So that's a bit about dreams and daydream. The other thing I wanted to bring in is that dreams and daydreams, or daydreams in particular, segue into Patrick Lecture 162, Three Levels of Reality. Now, in that lecture, the three levels are what you think exists, what actually exists, and what is possible. So if I think I'm powerless, I'll try to escape into the dream. What actually exists is a sense of powerlessness. So by looking at that and realizing why I escape and coming back and comparing the two, I may decide to determine what is possible. I may determine to take action. But if it's the substitute works, I won't take action. I've been satisfied. So there you go. Short summary of Dreams and Daydreams from Patrick Lecture 15. The influence between the spiritual and the material worlds. Thanks for listening.